Welcome to our podcast, A Novel Talk, co-hosted by Carl Lee, and I'm Wendy Kendall, cozy mystery author. Coming this summer is my new mystery and romance titled Cherry Shakes in the Park, a mystery adventure of dangers, divas, and frothy delights. My romantic mystery, Snow-Kissed Cookies to Die For, is available at all online retailers. Desiree and Leo are tangled up in romance and mystery. She's a first grade teacher and he's on the school's maintenance staff, and they're falling in love. Desiree's being stalked by who? There are several suspects, including Leo. Is he Desiree's the one or the stalker? And my mystery book that began it all, Cat Out of the Bag. That's Cat with a K for Catherine Watson. She's a purse designer and amateur sleuth who goes from designer bags to body bags when she's faced with a murder mystery. In the prequel, Pistachio Makes a Splash, Catherine and Mayor Brenda Durling investigate a chilling cold case. Now I'm busy working on the exciting sequel. Just wait until you see what Catherine's facing this time. Thank you to all the readers who've let me know how much you enjoy my books. And here comes your co-host.
Thanks, Wendy. My name is Carl Lee. I'm one of those readers that enjoy your books, by the way. Even though they are not the paranormal fantasy novels that I tend to write. Wendy, I was wondering, can I tell the listeners our breaking news?
Good idea, Carl.
Thanks. I'm excited to let everyone know that Wendy and I will be attending in person the Pacific Northwest Writers Association Summer Conference coming up in September, the 23rd through the 25th in Renton, Washington at the Hyatt Regency Lake Washington Hotel.
Yay! Are there still tickets available?
There are, for now, but space is limited. You can find out more and register online at pnwa.org. That's PNWA for Pacific Northwest Writers Association.
Oh, great. I hope to meet many of our listeners there in person. In the meantime, our guest today is Grace Sammon, an entrepreneur, educator, speaker, and author. She has started and managed 2 for-profit and 2 not-for-profit companies, and she's traveled to 35 states and 8 foreign countries. Recognized in Who's Who in Education and Who's Who in Literature, Grace is utilizing skills built up over decades as she reinvents herself with her award-winning 4th book and debut novel, The Eves. And with a return to one of her early loves, radio. The Eves is an award-winning intergenerational story about lives lived well and lives in transition. It's a novel that challenges each of us to ask who we want to be in the world, regardless of our age. Grace brings that quest for a good story and a drive to keep contributing to her new radio show, The Storytellers. Each episode captures the stories of authors and others who leave their mark on the world through the art of story. Grace is the founding member of the Author Talk Network, a member of the Women's Fiction Writers Association, and director of membership for the Bookish Road Trip. Grace grew up on Long Island, New York, and spent most of her life in the Washington, D.C. area. She currently lives on Florida's West Coast. Welcome to A Novel Talk, Grace Sammon.
I am so excited to be with Wendy and Carl today. Your introduction was lovely, but I just love what you do with this show and the platform you give authors, and I'm just honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Your radio cast, I caught a couple of them earlier this month, and they were very interesting as well, the way you approach your topics with your authors. I enjoyed that quite a bit.
Well, thank you. It's, as you know, it's wanting to give the author a platform to talk about their work, but really, so much of what we're talking about is storytelling and telling a good story and encouraging others to read.
Exactly, yes. Um, you know, we all have family. Some we're born into, and some are people that we collect along the ways. Um, I was wondering, can you tell us how the meaning of family changes for your protagonist, Jessica, through the telling of the Eves?
Absolutely. I would love everybody to have these wonderful sort of Ozzie and Harriet, and I'm dating myself by saying that, families. But Jessica's family starts out perfect and goes horribly awry. And when it does, Jessica becomes a very broken person. She's lost. She's given up on her appearance and her looks and her house and her profession, but not her lies and not her vodka. And what she finds is, luckily, she has this very bossy friend and who introduces her to a whole group of women who are older, they're diverse, they're very culturally diverse, and they're determined to leave their mark on the world. And through that and the listening to each other's stories, the entire group of characters' lives change.
That's such a beautifully told story. Now, Sonia and Jessica have such a long, close friendship in your book, The Eves. They almost read each other's minds. They keep each other going. Like, for example, when Sonia's saying, things either work out or they make a good story. Can you talk a little about your protagonist, Jessica, and her friend, the ubiquitous Sonia?
I love that you characterize Sonia as ubiquitous, because she certainly is. She is larger than life. She's big, she's bossy, she is never wrong. And she knows exactly how to get Jessica out of the hole that she has dug herself into. But there's an interesting interplay there in my mind. Just as Sonia is the grounding point for Jessica, Jessica is that for Sonia as well. There's a wonderful complexity in their relationship. But what I find important there, and what I was trying to explore, was this idea that sometimes we need that person to pull us out and show us who we are. There's a line in the book that I use several times about people who are immediately likable. And Jessica thinks many of the characters are immediately likable, but she never sees that in herself. And she needs that bossy friend who knows her secrets, but isn't going to throw her secrets in her face, but is going to lift her up at the same time as she pushes her forward.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's a very dynamic relationship.
Wendy just likes using words like ubiquitous.
I love the multisyllabic.
We'll have to come up with several of those.
Speaking of love, I love the Grange. It's one of the key locations in this story. I was wondering, is the Grange project based on a project that truly exists, or was this something that you just needed a fantastic backdrop for the story and created it out of full cloth?
I love the Grange as well, Carl, so I'm glad you loved it. For our listeners, the Grange is this beautiful piece of property that sits atop Calvert Cliffs, which overlooks the Chesapeake Bay. So it's about 40 miles outside of Washington, D.C. It is a wholly fictional place, but it is a place that I created that I would want to live in. There are llamas. It's a sustainable farm. It's been in the family of the African American family for generations upon generations. And the little nugget, though, for it was my son, many years ago, went and lived on a sustainable farm in Maine, and it was called the Grange, because the Grange is a real project, a real harvesting project. And he went and lived for 6 months without any electricity, without any social media, without anything. And they lived on this fully sustainable farm. And there's a scene in the Eves where there's a harvest. And that scene is told totally taken from my experience with my son. We went and we harvested at the end of the season with kids from an inner city high school these amazing crops. So that scene is very real, but the entire complexity of the place is made up out of whole cloth.
That's awesome.
Well, it certainly reads very real. Now, Jessica is a writer looking for a story. Margaret Mary is one of the ladies at the Eaves, and she offers what's a unique perspective for her. Quote, "Once upon a time we were girls, and we still believe we are." Can you comment about the power of belief in your book?
I think there's a dual-edged sword, Wendy. It's the idea of who believes in us and whether we ever believe in ourselves. And Jessica certainly doesn't believe in herself, and it goes back to that, immediately likable piece, if you will, that she doesn't always believe in herself, but she sees this greatness in everybody else. So there's a basic belief system, I think, that goes on, whether, we're talking about staying in the moment or contributing, or what mark do we want to leave on this world. The women of the Grange all believe that they are not done. And for me, I played with that because I was at a point where I said, oh, I must be done. I've raised my kids. My parents are deceased. I've done the educational consulting business. So I wanted to play with, was I really done? And apparently my characters taught me entirely that I am not done, because I had no idea post-launch all of the things that I would be doing. But it's that belief system about ourselves, being open to opportunities, where I think every single woman who lives at the Grange has that core belief system. And it's about perspective, though, because Margaret Mary was not my favorite character. I created her to be sort of the stern, unreachable, authoritarian, judgmental person in the book. And she's somebody who turns the entire piece around for me. So I wind up liking her a lot, but it's through that lens of how do we judge people, either, like a book by its cover, or how they present, and not taking the time to listen. One of the subtexts for the book is our stories are told when we listen. It's when our stories are told, everything changes. And that's what I was trying to get at there.
Beautiful. It's really such a beautiful sentiment. And yes, when people not done, it's just such a great story to read, and it's so hopeful.
Thank you.
Yeah, and another belief that you express in this book is Jess uses a phrase, "just for today." Now, I have used this phrase in my life when I am faced with an insurmountable challenge that's going to take more than a day, more than a week to achieve. I break it into just what I can handle for today, and I have used "just for today" so many times throughout my life to get me through really hard places. Jess uses it several times throughout the Eaves. What does that expression mean to you and for her?
I love that you learned that "just for today" helps you, because I think I'm old. I'm 68. So I think I just learned that sometime in the last few years. And it came to me when I was working in hospice. And hospice offers a training program to their volunteers, which is Reiki. And Reiki is a kind of laying on of the hands, although you don't usually touch the person you're working with. But there's a prayer, if you will, or a statement, if you will, in Reiki. And it talks about, just for today, I will be kind. Just for today, I will not be angry. Just for today. And it goes on. And actually, I have Sydney in the book. She says that, she recites that at dinner. And that is very much lifted from the Reiki principles, that we will be kind to everyone that we meet. We won't be judgmental. We will do our work honestly. And when I was that hospice volunteer and learned that, I really, really resonated with the concept that we only have today. And then as we move through life, and certainly as we've lived through COVID and the challenges that that has brought for so many of us, we really only have today. And I've embraced it in a whole new way. I've had many of my listeners say, well, you know, that's the AA or the Al-Anon or any of the other 12-step approaches. And I think that it's just a great approach to every day. We are not, tomorrow's not promised. We have today. And it's certainly, if you're facing something insurmountable, if we only have to do what we're doing today, tomorrow is now possible.
Yep.
I like that. Would you talk about Jessica's trip halfway around the world to Africa? What does she hope to find?
Actually, I think Jessica doesn't go hoping to find anything. I think she goes to hide. She has this horrible family situation that has broken her, and she is on uneven footing in almost every area of her life, and she can't face another Christmas in her current situation. So I think she goes to hide. What's interesting is, for me, the 2 chapters that are on Africa are clear in my head. They are pivotal pieces. They introduce characters that help Jessica see her life differently. They help her find her footing in a way that I don't think she would have otherwise. Interestingly enough, though, there are some readers who find those 2 chapters totally unimportant. But I think the premise, Wendy, is that she goes to hide because she doesn't want to face her life. And the reality is that Africa changes her life.
Yes, just as a note, this reader did not find that at all. I found it, actually, I found that part of it a wonderful surprise. And yes, there was a lot of meat to that trip. So, and I enjoyed reading that part.
Oh, thank you. And parenthetically, the character of Robert is totally made up, but the idea of going to Africa by yourself at Christmas time is something I did. And so there was I lost my luggage, for example. I got to Africa at 2:00 in the morning, and I had a duffel bag with a change of underwear in it, and my luggage came back 3 months later. So that happens to Jessica, so it was just me being cathartic, because seriously, so Jessica goes through her time in Africa with, wearing her pajamas.
Yep.
Travel's fun, isn't it?
I love it.
So I love orchids. We have several around the house. I think they're absolutely beautiful. I read once that while they appear delicate, they're a symbol for strength. I was wondering how that's reflected throughout the eaves.
Well, in some ways, it's a steel magnolias kind of thing, isn't it?
That's what I got.
And the reason for the orchids is Jessica starts out her married life with her now ex-husband growing orchids in Florida. And here, honest to goodness, up north, every place else, they think, oh, these are so hard to grow. Orchids are like really nice weeds. You never have to, you put them outside. It's so humid here. They're going to bloom twice a year. They're going to bloom really beautifully. But they're really very, very simple. So this is something Jessica brings with her from her past. She grows them on the floor of the bathroom in her Washington, D.C. townhouse. But she also uses them as peace offerings to the other characters. But she also learns about their properties in ways that she, because she is Jessica and is oblivious to so much, she doesn't realize that they can treat cancer, that they're used as a spice. So there's a lot of factoids in the eaves that are vehicles for both engaging the audience, but also teaching Jessica a few lessons.
Yeah. We don't grow ours in the bathroom, but we have little mister guns that keep the air around them moist.
2 ice cubes a week. That's all they take.
I'd like to talk about Roy a little bit. Roy is a general contractor who's working on Jessica's house and also the Grange. But he takes a personal interest not only in the artistry of his work, but also in the people he's working for. Would you talk a little about Roy?
Roy is the least fictional character in the entire book. And this makes book clubs, when I talk to book clubs, and I love doing that, this makes some people at book clubs, because they're largely women, very frustrated, because Roy Gillis is to a T my husband. So Roy walks in the door saying, greetings, greetings. He cooks. He's out, as we're taping this now, he's out building a patio. He's just this amazing person. And we've been married only 10 years. So I can still be a newlywed in my mind. But he's the least fictional character in the book. And for me in my personal life, and for Jessica and the others, he is the grounding person. He and probably Elizabeth are the two people who ground the characters. He's genuinely interested. He's always upbeat. He's a wealth of knowledge. He's probably the only character that readers say, oh, he has no flaws, so he's totally made up. But he's not.
I liked Roy too. I thought he was an excellent person to be in Jess's life. So there's a lot of either miscommunication or just blatant failure to communicate, people refusing to communicate throughout the Eves. And it affects many of the people in the story, not just Jess. Can you talk to us about how this miscommunication affects Jess herself and the people around her?
For me, it's really the crux of the whole book. It's thinking, I think this is true, that most of the things that go awry in our life is because we haven't spent the time to try to understand, or somebody said something and we misinterpreted and we didn't go back to what we call in grade school checking for understanding. Mm-hmm. Right? We just make these assumptions. You hear things the wrong way. And this happens to many of the characters, as you point out, Carl, in the book. There's this, somebody just goes down the wrong path. This certainly happens between Jessica and her family members. None of the tragedy that befalls Jessica would have happened, in my estimation, if indeed there had been better communication. There's a horrific car accident in the book. I believe none of that would have happened had they spent the time talking and listening and really respecting each other. So one of the messages I wanted to get across was spend time listening. And that goes back to the question that you both asked earlier about perspective on people. The book was in part inspired by an old John Prine song, which I heard through Bette Midler. And the name of the song is Hello in There, Hello. And the concept there is, the singer, the main character singing is saying, here we are, we don't talk to each other anymore. Me and my spouse don't talk anymore. And people look at us and think we're just old people. So when you pass us by, don't stop and stare as if you didn't care. Say hello in there, hello. And I wanted to, hopefully not with a hammer, and drive home that point of let's listen to each other more. And certainly in these last few years of no matter where you fall on a political or scientific or any other spectrum, we have seen such polarization and a lack of understanding, whether you're, one candidate or another candidate, or you're vax or unvax. I certainly have opinions on that, but I would like to pride myself on the fact that I at least listen. And the characters, I think, trip over themselves in the Eves when they don't.
I think they do too.
I'm glad we agree on that.
Great advice. Another lady at the Eves, Elizabeth, says, so little of what is planned happens. This sentiment is certainly true in life. is it also true in writing a story? Did your plot for this story evolve as you wrote it? What was the initial inspiration? I think you might have spoken to that a little bit already, but if there's anything more you want to add.
For me, you get to that question that authors are asked all the time. Do you write by the seat of your pants? Are you a pantser or are you a plotter? I'm a little pantser, plotter. I'm a little bit of each. In each of my 4 books, I knew where I wanted it to go. So I knew the end. I actually wrote the last chapter before I wrote the first chapter. And I've done that. I'm starting another novel now, and I just wrote the epilogue, which people think is really funny because I haven't even written the last chapter, but I've written the epilogue. But I think that, my father used to say all the time, man plans and God laughs, which I think is very, very, very true. But in my writing, I knew where I wanted to go. I knew the starting point, which we did talk about. It's that, where am I after my career and my role as mom, and I wasn't married at the time. So who am I as I transition into this point in my life? And I would just segue there for a minute that the youngest character in the Eves is 15 and the oldest is 94. So I wanted that question to be age appropriate for that gamut of ages. So when I was writing, I knew where I wanted to go in education, which is what I come out of. We talk about starting with the end in mind. So I don't know how you start, Carl, without knowing the end, but what happens in between is not always plotted for me at all. There's a character in the book named Jesper, who I never envisioned. And my beta group kept on saying, don't you think this character should show up? And I was like, oh no, he was in chapter 1. We don't need him again. And it was the insistence on beta readers or developmental editors that really made me say, oh my gosh, he changes the whole outcome of this book. So I'm so delighted that he showed up, but he was not planned.
Mm.
Yeah, I know where I'm starting and where I'm finishing, but that's pretty much the plot.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, we've talked a lot about this amazing, fabulous story. And we usually ask if our guest would mind reading for our listeners. But I'm pleading with you, please read for our listeners.
Oh, okay. There are 2 scenes I love in the book. Hopefully I love many of the scenes. One is a scene where Jessica is talking to her adult children as if they were still little kids. But what I'm going to read to you, which I was tempted to read that one, but this one gets a feel for what Wendy was talking about before when we talk about Margaret Mary, who is this haughty character. And Jessica has gone to her because she has decided, because Sonia has told her to, take these oral histories of the women. So she is in this tiny room. Margaret Mary is a former nun, and they're in this tiny little room. And Margaret Mary has just told her stories of her early childhood. And Margaret Mary says, "Those are my earliest and best childhood memories. But other than being a delightfully quaint and dated story, I cannot see what difference it can make, Miss Barnett. Oh, please, please call me Jessica. It makes me uncomfortable to have you refer to me so formally." "So be it," she says, looking away from me for the first time. "The lack of formality today is something I mourn, along with the lack of good sentence structure." I'm not sure if it's permissible to laugh in her presence, but I find her statement wonderful, and I want to remember to write it down later. For now, I am not sure whether I should be addressing her by her last name or her first. Instead, I simply state, "The memory you shared with me is delightful, and it gives me a great picture of you." Again, she raises her hand, indicating silence. She finishes my sentence. "A great picture of what, Jessica?" "When I was young?" "Jessica, close your eyes." I do so. think about yourself, Jessica, is the image you create of a woman near 60 with a slightly sagging jowl, a hint of gray, and with lines on her face and veins clearly visible on her hands. She notices I wince. Let me shift to something more comfortable. When you think of any one of us here, what do you see? You see our age, how our bodies sag, how it takes us a bit of time to get up from prayer. You were surprised when you learned that we do things like Photoshop. You see, Jessica, we do talk about you when you are not here. There are not many secrets when you live in community like this. Keep your eyes closed. You imagine yourself as very young next to us, somehow giving you a feeling of youth and immortality. You note our gray hairs and our agedness. You are ready to write our histories because you think our lives are over and behind us. You think we are done. Open your eyes. Am I that far from the truth, Jessica? A look of self-satisfaction, indicating that she is exactly right about how I am assessing the situation, crosses her face. She closes her eyes and continues. I am shocked when I catch my reflection in a mirror or a store window. I don't recognize and I want to deny the sag of my neck, the spots and veins on my hands, and the soft flabbiness of my breasts and stomach. The lack of pubic hair. She sighs. I am shocked because when I close my eyes, I see a young and able woman. I am still in my 30s, maybe my 40s. I see myself as being capable of doing all the things that I did represented on that quilt behind you, sailing and running with my children. She opens her eyes and chuckles at the look on my face. See, I have surprised you. It seems that you are easy to surprise. You have made predeterminations about us. We are not, as I fear you believe, done our lives. We have probably had all of our firsts, our first dates, our first cars, first loves, careers, and the deaths of those close to us. We've had our life-threatening awakenings and so on, but I am not convinced that we are done or done all of our firsts. The rest of what time we had would be entirely boring if that was the case, Jessica. Jessica, as long as you hold these preconceived notions of us, you will never get the truth of any of us. When we are all together in the common areas, I do not see old women. I see the girls we once were, Jessica. I think your approach to this oral history project is quite wrong-headed. Quite wrong-headed. I see I have confused you. It is just food for thought. Do not write the stories about the beginning of our lives because you have judged we are already at the end of them. Jessica, once upon a time we were girls and we still believe we are.
I love that scene. I thought that scene was awesome. And I also love her use of the word wrong-headed.
Well, she's absolutely correct. Jessica is wrong-headed about this entire project, but she gets it right.
She gets there in the end, yes. Thank you so much for the reading. A great scene from many great scenes in this book.
Thank you for wanting me to read.
So inspiring. Thank you so much, Grace Sammon, for joining us for a novel talk. Can you tell us something about your radio show, The Storytellers?
I love doing the radio show, and it is a surprise. My characters have taught me that I am not done. I did an early interview about the Eves with a woman who was 84 years old who ran a radio station called Spunky Old Broads. Her name was Dr. Gail Carson. And she loved our interview so much. She said, Grace, I want you to have a radio show on my station. And I said, oh, I can't do that. And she had read my book and she goes, Grace, have you listened to your characters? You are not done. So she invited me to have a show on her station. She was going, and she is an amazing, I think she was maybe 4'11", and she was going to be my 6th guest, and she passed away from cancer the day before we were supposed to tape.
Oh.
So but what a gift she gave me, and what a character who would have been so at home in the book, The Eves. So right up until the end, she was recording. I think she did 6 hours of recording a day. I have no idea how she does that.
Fantastic.
So I created the storytellers to kind of get the story behind those of us who choose to leave our mark on the world through the art of story. When I go on hiatus, which will be in June, we will have done 52 episodes in a year. And I can't wait to come back for season 2 in August.
Well, I hope that our listeners are going to check out that radio show and also your website, gracesammon.net, for more information about this author and her book, The Eves. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Remember, a novel read leads to a novel talk.